The rhythmic clatter of the wheels was a metronome counting out the seconds of a life he no longer recognized. 6 months, 183 days since the world had cracked open and swallowed his son, leaving Thaddeus Mercer a hollowed-out shell of the man, of the sheriff he had once been. The vast, sun-scorched plains of the West slid past the grimy window of the passenger car, a monotonous blur of ochre and sagebrush that mirrored the desolation in his soul. He'd ridden this line, and a dozen others like it, chasing ghosts. Every whisper of a blonde-haired boy, every rumor of a child with a peculiar mark, had led him to another dead end, another dusty town where hope went to die. He'd traded his badge for a saddle, his home for the road, and his heart for a cold, hard stone of grief. He was no longer Sheriff Mercer, the man who upheld the law. He was just Thad, a name whispered like a prayer for a ghost. He felt the phantom weight of his son Samuel in his arms, a memory so sharp it was a physical ache. He remembered the boy's laugh, the impossible softness of his hair, the way his small hand fit perfectly into his own, and the birthmark, the star-shaped splash of darker pigment on the boy's left wrist, a tiny constellation unique to him, a mark Sarah had called his a lucky star. Sarah. Her memory was another ghost that rode alongside him, her face superimposed over the passing landscape. He saw her in the gentle slope of a hill, heard her voice in the sigh of the wind. She had died bringing Samuel into the world, leaving Thad with the one perfect thing they had made together. And he had failed her. He had let their son be stolen from him, ripped from their ranch while he was miles away, delivering a prisoner. The guilt was a constant companion, a bitter taste in the back of his throat. The Crimson Creek Gang. Their name was a curse. They'd hit the ranch not for money, not for horses, but for his son. They'd left 2 of his ranch hands dead, and a cattle brand, their twisted insignia, burned into the door of the main house. It was the same brand he'd seen on rustled cattle, a mark of senseless violence. But this was different. This was personal, an act so monstrous it defied reason. He had hunted them, but they were shadows, swallowed by the territories. All that was left of his search was a worn photograph of Samuel in his breast pocket and a dwindling pile of cash. He was on his way back now, not home, for there was no home, but back to the county where it had all begun, to admit defeat to his friend, Marshall Brady, the man who'd been feeding him leads for half a year. The thought of it was another failure to be swallowed. The sudden, violent screech of steel on steel ripped Thad from his stupor. The train lurched, throwing passengers forward. A woman screamed. Bags tumbled from the overhead racks. Thad's hand shot out, bracing himself against the seat in front of him, his old instincts flaring to life. The train shuddered to a halt, the sudden silence deafening after the cacophony. People were shouting, pressing against the windows to see what had happened. Thad pushed his way into the aisle, his eyes scanning the chaos for a threat. The conductor, a portly man named Hayes with a face perpetually slick with sweat, burst into the car. "Everyone stay calm! Remain in your seats!" His voice was a strained bellow. But nobody was listening. They were all surging toward the front of the train. Thad moved with them, his body tight, a knot of unease coiling in his gut. He stepped down from the car onto the hot, gravelly railbed. Ahead, a small crowd was gathering around the engine, which hissed steam like a wounded beast. And then he saw it, a flash of color against the dusty brown of the landscape. A small figure, standing stock still on the tracks just a few yards from the massive iron cowcatcher. A child, a small boy in dusty overalls, his blonde hair bleached nearly white by the sun. He was just standing there, looking up at the metal behemoth that had nearly claimed him, his expression one of dazed wonder, not fear. A collective gasp went through the crowd. The engineer, a gaunt, oil-stained man, was leaning out of his cab, his face ashen. He had stopped the train in time. A miracle. But Thad wasn't thinking about miracles. He wasn't thinking about the engineer or the crowd. His entire world had narrowed to the small, solitary figure on the tracks. Every fiber of his being screamed. It was an impossible thought, a hallucination born of 6 months of obsessive grief. He started moving, not walking, but lurching forward, shouldering people aside. The air grew thin in his lungs. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, wild drumbeat. The boy turned his head slightly, as if sensing Thodd's approach. He had a smudge of dirt on his cheek. His eyes were wide and blue, the same shade as Sarah's. Thodd broke into a run, the gravel crunching under his worn boots. He was shouting a name, a sound torn from the deepest part of him, a name he hadn't dared say aloud in months. "Samuel!" He fell to his knees in the dirt and rock, sliding the last few feet. He reached out, his hands trembling, and pulled the child into his arms. The boy was real, solid, warm. He smelled of dust and sun and something indefinably, achingly familiar. Thodd buried his face in the boy's soft hair, and a sound escaped him, a ragged sob that was half pain, half absolution. It was him. He pulled back, his hands framing the boy's face, his eyes scanning every feature as if memorizing them for the first time. The curve of his cheek, the small chip in his front tooth he'd gotten from falling off the porch swing. It was all there. It was his son. "Samuel," he whispered again, his voice thick. The boy looked at him, his brow furrowed in confusion, but not fear. Instinct took over. Thodd's thumb brushed against the boy's left wrist. He pushed back the cuff of the dusty overalls. And there it was, faint under a layer of grime, but unmistakable. A perfect 5-pointed star. His lucky star. The world tilted, then slammed back into place, solid and real and blindingly bright. He had found him. The 6 months of hell, the endless miles, the gnawing emptiness. It had all led to this. Atonement. A physical act of rescue for the son he thought he had lost forever. He clutched the boy to his chest, rocking back and forth on the tracks, oblivious to the murmuring crowd, the hissing engine, the vast, indifferent sky. He had found his son. The initial shockwave of euphoria began to recede, replaced by the cold tide of reality. He was in the middle of nowhere, on a train track, holding a son who had been missing for half a year. Questions swirled. How did he get here? Who left him on the tracks? He stood, lifting Samuel into his arms. The boy was heavier than he remembered, taller. 6 months was a lifetime for a child. Samuel clung to him, his initial confusion giving way to a simple childlike need for comfort. The crowd of passengers parted as Thodd walked back toward the train, his face a mask of grim determination. Conductor Hayes met him at the steps. "Is he yours?" Hayes asked, his voice softer now, tinged with awe. Thodd just nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He climbed back into the car and found his seat, settling Samuel on his lap. The boy nestled against his chest, his breathing evening out. For the first time in 183 days, the hollow space inside Thodd was filled. He was whole again. The train eventually lurched back into motion, its slow, clattering rhythm now a soothing lullaby. Passengers shot glances at them, whispering amongst themselves. They were part of a miracle, and it made them feel important. Thodd ignored them, his world reduced to the weight of his son in his arms. He used a corner of his sleeve, dampened with water from his canteen, to gently clean the grime from the boy's face, from his hands, from the star on his wrist. The mark was a confirmation, a seal of truth that silenced the last, lingering whispers of doubt. It was then that the woman approached. She was well dressed, in a dark traveling suit that seemed too warm for the weather. Her face was pale, her hands twisting a lace handkerchief. She looked respectable, like a schoolteacher or a doctor's wife, but her eyes held a frantic, desperate energy. "Excuse me," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Pardon me, sir." Thodd looked up, his arm tightening instinctively around Samuel. "That's my son," she said, the words rushing out. "That's my Thomas. He wandered off when the train made an unscheduled stop back at the water tower. Oh, thank God you found him. I've been half mad with worry." Thod stared at her. The words made no sense. This was Samuel, his son. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and steady. "You're mistaken." The woman, who introduced herself as Dorothy Whitmore, shook her head, a tear tracing a path through the powder on her cheek. No, I'm not. That's my boy, Thomas Hartwell. We're traveling to meet my husband in dusty old Redemption." Her story was plausible. Her distress seemed genuine. A few passengers nearby murmured in sympathy. The man across the aisle, a salesman by the look of his sample cases, nodded sagely. It happens. Kids wander. Thod felt a cold knot of dread form in his stomach. This couldn't be happening. "His name is Samuel Mercer," Thod said, his voice hardening. "He was taken from my ranch 6 months ago." Dorothy Whitmore flinched as if struck. 6 months? That's impossible. I've had my Thomas with me his entire life. He has a birthmark, see? A little star on his wrist. His father says it's his guiding star. She reached for the boy's arm. Thod jerked Samuel away, pulling him closer. "Get back," he growled. The train car, which had felt like a sanctuary moments before, was suddenly a cage. The murmuring of the passengers grew louder, their gazes shifting from sympathy for him to suspicion. He was a rough-looking man, unshaven, his clothes worn from the road. She was a respectable lady. The math was simple. Conductor Hayes pushed his way down the aisle. "What's all this now, ma'am? Is this your boy?" "Yes," she cried. "He thinks he's his. Please, you have to believe me." Hayes looked at Thod, his expression troubled. "Sir, we need to sort this out. The lady seems quite certain." Thod's mind raced. This was a trick. It had to be. But why? "He answers to Samuel," Thod insisted, his voice tight. He looked down at the boy. "Samuel, look at me, son." The boy looked up, his blue eyes wide and uncertain. He didn't respond to the name, but he didn't respond to Thomas's either. He just clung to Thod, a silent observer in a storm he couldn't comprehend. The miracle was souring, curdling into a nightmare. The hope that had bloomed in his chest was being choked by a paranoid vine of suspicion. He had found his son, only to have him claimed by a stranger in a plot that made no sense. Then, the situation escalated. From the back of the car, a man rose and began to walk toward them. He was tall and lean, with a predator's grace. He wore a dusty black duster, and his face was all sharp angles and shadows under the brim of his hat. A cruel smile played on his lips. As he drew closer, Thod felt a jolt of primal recognition. He didn't know the man's face, but he knew the type. This was a wolf. "Seems to be some confusion here," the man said, his voice a low, gravelly drawl that commanded attention. The car fell silent. He stopped beside Dorothy Whitmore, placing a proprietary hand on her shoulder. "The little lady is right. The boy is hers. I ought to know. I'm her husband." Thod's blood ran cold. He looked from the man's smiling, predatory face to Dorothy's pale, terrified one. He was her husband? The man's eyes, cold and dark as river stones, locked onto Thod's. "The name's Ezra Blackwood, and you've got my son." Ezra Blackwood. The name was unfamiliar, but the palpable violence radiating from him was not. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding. This was a coordinated deception. The claustrophobia of the train car intensified. He was surrounded, trapped. The passengers were now a jury, their faces a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. They were watching a drama unfold, and he was the villain holding a stolen child. "You're lying," Thod said, his voice barely a whisper. Ezra's smile widened. "Am I? Let's ask the boy. Tommy, come to your PA." He held out a hand. Samuel flinched back, pressing his face into Thod's chest. A small victory, but it meant nothing to the audience. Ezra tut-tutted. "Shy little fella." The strangers spooked him. He looked around the car, his gaze lingering on the most influential-looking passengers. "My wife and I were bringing him to see a specialist. He's a sickly child. That's why she was so panicked. This man," he gestured dismissively at Thod, "is a kidnapper. A grieving father, maybe, who sees his own lost child in every face, but a kidnapper all the same. The narrative was perfect. It painted Thad as a tragic but dangerous figure. It explained Dorothy's panic and the child's silence. Thad felt his control slipping. He had to think. His dormant sheriff's skills, buried under 6 months of grief, began to stir. He looked at Dorothy. She wouldn't meet his eyes. Her hands were wringing that handkerchief into a shredded mess. Her conscience was her weak point. He looked at Ezra. All confidence and menace, no weakness there. Thad decided to play their game. He held up a hand, addressing Conductor Hayes, but speaking for the benefit of the entire car. All right, let's be calm. You say he's your son. You say his name is Thomas Hartwell. He looked at Dorothy. Where was he born? She hesitated for a fraction of a second. Ezra's fingers tightened on her shoulder. Flagstaff, she said quickly. 2 years ago this past April. Wrong, Thad said, his voice flat. He was born in October, in my house. My wife. He choked on the word. My wife died, giving birth to him. A ripple of uncertainty went through the passengers. His pain felt more real than her rehearsed facts. He pressed his advantage, his eyes still on Dorothy. What's his favorite food? Dorothy looked panicked. She glanced up at Ezra, whose smile was now gone, replaced by a look of cold fury. He likes sweet potatoes, she stammered. Thad shook his head. He hates them, always has. He loves cornbread, crumbled up in milk. He'd eat it for every meal if you let him. He knew these things. They were a part of him, etched into his memory. They were the small, intimate truths of fatherhood that couldn't be faked. He could feel the tide of opinion in the car beginning to shift back, however slightly. He had to break them. He had to find the lie and pull on it until their whole story unraveled. He looked at Ezra, at the hand resting on Dorothy's shoulder. And then he saw it. On the back of Ezra's right hand, partially obscured by his cuff. A tattoo. A dark, ugly mark seared into the skin. Thad's breath caught in his throat. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. Let me see your hand, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Ezra instinctively pulled his hand back. I don't think so. Show me your hand, Thad repeated, his voice rising. He stood up, still holding Samuel, who whimpered at the sudden movement. The car was dead silent. Every eye was on them. Ezra's face was a thundercloud. He was a man used to intimidation, not being challenged. Thad took a step forward. Show me the damn hand, or I'll break your arm and show it to everyone myself. The threat was raw, stripped of any veneer of law or civility. It was the promise of a man with nothing left to lose. For a tense second, it seemed violence would erupt right there. Then, with a sneer, Ezra slowly extended his hand, pulling back his cuff. The tattoo was a stylized symbol, a twisted knot of lines and curves, a cattle brand. Thad's heart stopped. It was the same brand that had been burned into the door of his home, the mark of the Crimson Creek Gang. The world narrowed to that mark. The smoke, the splintered wood, the bodies of his ranch hands, it all came rushing back, a tidal wave of trauma. This man, this Ezra Blackwood, hadn't just stumbled upon his son. He was one of them. He was one of the men who had destroyed his life. Rage, pure and white-hot, surged through Thad, burning away the grief and confusion. He looked from the brand to Ezra's smug face. And then he remembered something else. The morning after the raid, the local doctor had mentioned something he'd dismissed at the time. One of the dead ranch hands had defensive wounds, including bite marks on his arms, as if he'd fought his attacker off even as he was dying. Thad looked down at Samuel, then back at Ezra. He gently took his son's face in his hand. Open up, son. Let me see your teeth. Confused, the boy complied. Thad looked at the small, sharp indentations, including the slightly chipped front tooth. He then looked at Ezra's other hand, the left one, which was clenched into a fist at his side. No, not a fist. He was hiding his wrist. Your other hand, Thad snarled. He lunged forward, grabbing Ezra's left wrist with his free hand, ignoring the man's shout of surprise and pain. He wrenched the arm out, pushing up the sleeve. There, on the fleshy part of the wrist, was a series of small, scarred indentations, nearly healed but still visible. A perfect match for a child's bite. A desperate final act of defiance from a boy being stolen from his home. The puzzle pieces didn't just fall into place. They slammed together with the force of a physical blow. Ezra Blackwood had been there. He had held Samuel, and Samuel had fought back. In that moment of searing clarity, as Thad held the proof in his hands, he saw the final, damning piece of evidence. Over Ezra's shoulder, Dorothy Whitmore's face was a canvas of pure horror. Her carefully constructed facade had crumbled, revealing the terrified woman beneath. Her eyes met Thad's, and in that shared gaze, he saw it all, her guilt, her fear, her unwilling complicity. And then, she looked at Ezra. It was a fleeting glance, a micro-expression of shared knowledge and panicked confirmation. It was all Thad needed. They were partners. The entire setup, the respectable woman, the concerned husband, was an elaborate, monstrous lie. The crowd in the car gasped as they saw the bite mark, then the brand, and understood. The jury had reached its verdict, but the trial wasn't over. Ezra, realizing the game was up, let out a harsh laugh. "Clever," he sneered, ripping his arm from Thad's grasp. "Very clever, Sheriff." The title dripped with mockery. "But you're a little late. You've been chasing your tail for 6 months, haven't you? Following every little breadcrumb we left for you?" Thad stared at him, a new, colder dread seeping into his bones. "What are you talking about?" "Your search," Ezra said, his voice dropping for Thad's ears only. "All those helpful tips, all those sightings of a blonde boy. Who do you think was feeding them to your good friend, Marshall Brady?" The name hit Thad like a bullet. Marshall Brady, his friend. The man he'd known for 20 years, the man who'd stood by him at Sarah's funeral, the man who had been the source of almost every lead in his agonizing search. Brady. It was impossible. A betrayal so profound, so absolute, it hollowed him out all over again. The search hadn't been fruitless. It had been a diversion, a lie, orchestrated by his closest friend to keep him running in circles while his son was... Where? Why? The dawning horror was a physical sickness. He had been a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. His friend, his entire support system, was part of the conspiracy. He wasn't just fighting a gang of outlaws. He was fighting the system he had once sworn to uphold. He looked from Ezra's sneering face to Dorothy's crumbling one, and then at the son in his arms, the innocent center of this web of deceit. He was no longer on a train. He was in hell, and the floor had just fallen away. The train was scheduled for a brief stop in the town of Redemption. A fitting name, Thad thought with a bitter irony. It was a small, dusty outpost, barely a town, with a telegraph office, a saloon, and a marshal's office. His marshal's office. Brady's office. Ezra Blackwood seemed to relax as the train slowed, a smug certainty settling over him. He knew Brady was waiting. For him, this was a homecoming. For Thad, it was a gallows. He had to act. He couldn't let them take Samuel off the train. He couldn't walk into a trap laid by his own friend. As the train hissed and groaned into the station, Thad made his decision. He looked at Conductor Hayes, whose face was a mixture of confusion and fear. "Don't open the doors," Thad ordered, his voice carrying the old weight of his authority. "What? I can't do that. We're on a schedule. Marshall Brady himself is meeting the train." "He's part of it," Thad said, the words tasting like ash. "He's with them." Before Hayes could protest, Thad turned his attention to Ezra. The time for words was over. He lunged, not at Ezra, but past him, slamming the butt of his palm into the emergency brake lever. The train, which had been coasting to a stop, jolted violently, throwing everyone off balance again. Ezra staggered, cursing. In that split second of chaos, Thad acted. He shoved Dorothy Whitmore hard into Ezra, sending them both tumbling into a heap of limbs and luggage. He didn't have his gun. He'd sold it weeks ago for travel money. He was armed only with desperation. He spun around, clutching Samuel tight, and kicked open the door on the opposite side of the car, away from the station platform. He leaped from the still-moving train, landing hard in the sagebrush and dirt, rolling to absorb the impact, his body curled protectively around his son. He scrambled to his feet, his shoulders screaming in protest, and started running. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to get away from the station, from the train, from the man who was once his friend. Shouts erupted from the train behind him. A gunshot cracked the air, and a bullet whizzed past his head, kicking up a puff of dust. He didn't look back. He ran toward a line of rocky outcrops, the only cover in the flat, exposed landscape. Samuel was crying now, terrified by the noise and the frantic motion. "It's okay, son, it's okay!" Thad panted, his lungs on fire. "I've got you!" He risked a glance over his shoulder. Ezra Blackwood had jumped from the train and was running after them, a pistol in his hand. More figures were appearing on the station platform. One of them, broad-shouldered and wearing a familiar duster, was Marshal Brady. He was pointing, directing two other men, his deputies, to spread out. They were trying to flank him. He was caught. A wave of despair washed over him, so potent it almost brought him to his knees. He'd had his son in his arms for less than an hour, and he was going to lose him all over again. He ducked behind a large boulder, pressing Samuel down, shielding him with his body. Another shot ricocheted off the rock near his head, showering them with stone fragments. "Give it up, Thad!" It was Brady's voice, a familiar boom that now sounded like a death knell. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. The boy doesn't belong to you." The lie was so audacious, so complete, that it fueled Thad's rage anew. He was trapped, outgunned, and betrayed on all sides. He peered around the edge of the boulder. Ezra was closing in from the left, using the terrain for cover. Brady and his deputies were advancing from the front. It was a classic pincer movement, one he and Brady had used a dozen times themselves to flush out fugitives. The irony was a razor blade in his gut. Just when the last flicker of hope was about to be extinguished, a new sound cut through the air. It wasn't a pistol shot. It was the heavy, authoritative crack of a rifle. A bullet slammed into the dirt at Ezra Blackwood's feet, making him dive for cover. Thad looked back toward the train. Standing in the doorway of the engine cab, silhouetted against the sky, was the quiet, oil-stained engineer. He held a long-barreled rifle, and he was calmly levering another round into the chamber. He hadn't run. He had seen the truth, and he had chosen a side. The engineer fired again. One of Brady's deputies yelped and clutched his leg, dropping to the ground. The balance had shifted. It wasn't much, but it was a chance. The engineer's covering fire pinned Brady and his men down. It gave Thad a sliver of time. He looked at Ezra, who was now pinned behind a rock of his own, cursing. He had to end this. Now. Suddenly, a figure stumbled out from behind the train, running toward them. It was Dorothy Whitmore. Her hair was a mess, her respectable suit torn. She was weeping openly, a broken, desperate sound. "Ezra, no!" she screamed. "Stop it! Just stop!" Ezra turned his head, his face contorted with fury. "Get back, you stupid woman!" he roared. She ignored him, her eyes finding Thad's. Her face was a ruin of guilt. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "They made me do it. They have my daughter." It was another twist, another layer of the conspiracy. Her motivation wasn't greed, it was desperation. She was a victim too, forced into a monstrous role. She took another step into the open ground between them. Ezra, enraged by her defiance, raised his pistol. "I said get back!" he bellowed. Brady screamed from behind him, "Blackwood, don't!" But it was too late. Ezra fired. Dorothy cried out, a sharp, bird-like sound, and crumpled to the ground. The shot seemed to break a spell. The chaotic violence paused for a heartbeat, the world holding its breath at the sight of the fallen woman. In that heartbeat, Thad moved. Fueled by a cold, precise rage, he surged from behind his rock, charging directly at Ezra. Ezra, shocked by the sudden assault, tried to bring his pistol around. He was too slow. Thad crashed into him like a freight train, his shoulder driving into Ezra's chest. The gun flew from Ezra's grasp as they both went down, rolling in the dirt and gravel. They came up swinging, a wild, brutal fight driven by hate and desperation. Thad was bigger, stronger, fueled by 6 months of righteous fury. Ezra was a cornered snake, all vicious, dirty tricks. He pulled a knife from his boot, slashing wildly. Thad caught his wrist, the blade stopping an inch from his face. They strained, muscles screaming, faces inches apart. Ezra's eyes were wide with hate. "You don't get it, Sheriff," he hissed, spitting blood. "This isn't about you. It was never about you." Thad grunted, forcing the knife hand back. "Then what is it about?" "It's about him," Ezra snarled, his eyes flicking to where Samuel was huddled behind the rock. "He's not just some rancher's kid. He was an order, a special request." "An order?" The words made no sense. "Who?" Thad demanded, twisting the wrist until Ezra cried out in pain. The knife dropped. "A family," Ezra gasped out, his face pale. "A rich family. Back east, Boston. They pay for what they want. They wanted a boy, blonde hair, blue eyes, and the star. The damn star was the proof of purchase." The horror of it was a physical blow, knocking the air from Thad's lungs. Samuel hadn't been stolen in a fit of random violence. He had been selected, targeted, a commodity to be bought and sold by a faceless, powerful cabal so wealthy they could reach across a continent to pluck a child from his life. The Crimson Creek gang wasn't the head of the snake. They were just the fangs. Brady and his corrupt office were just a tool. The real evil was untouchable, a polished, systemic monolith in a far-off city. He had won the fight, but he had lost the war before it even began. He couldn't fight a ghost. He couldn't bring the law down on people who were above it. The victory in his hands turned to ash. He slammed Ezra's head against the ground, stunning him. He scrambled for Ezra's dropped pistol just as Marshal Brady and his remaining deputy reached them, guns drawn. "It's over, Thad," Brady said, his voice heavy. He looked exhausted, defeated. He wasn't looking at Thad, but at the body of Dorothy Whitmore, lying still in the dust. The engineer's rifle was still trained on them from the engine cab, a silent promise of mutual destruction. The standoff was absolute. Suddenly, one of the station hands came running from the telegraph office, a yellow piece of paper in his hand. "Marshal, a wire for you. It's urgent." Brady, his eyes never leaving Thad, gestured for the paper. The man handed it to him, then scurried away. Brady read the telegram, and the color drained from his face. He looked up at Thad, and for the first time, Thad saw not a traitor, but a man drowning. "What is it?" Thad asked. Brady slowly, numbly handed him the telegram. The black letters seemed to mock him. "Blackwood compromised. Asset recovery failed. Activate secondary team. Boston demands delivery. No more mistakes." It was a death sentence. They knew. The Boston organization already knew the plan had failed. They weren't giving up. They were sending new hunters. More professional, more ruthless. He could kill Ezra. He could even kill Brady. But he couldn't kill a shadow. He couldn't fight an organization that could send endless waves of men after his son. He would be looking over his shoulder for the rest of his life. Samuel would never be safe. The chilling realization settled over him. As long as the boy was Samuel Mercer, the boy with the star on his wrist, he would be hunted forever. The aftermath was a quiet, stunned tableau under the harsh sun. Ezra Blackwood was unconscious, zip-tied with a strap from Thad's own saddlebag. Brady's deputy was tending to his wound, his face pale, and Dorothy Whitmore was dead. Her sacrificial run had shattered the confrontation, her death a testament to a conscience that had finally rebelled. The quiet engineer had descended from his cab, his rifle held loosely but ready, a silent guardian. Conductor Hayes, looking shaken, was trying to keep the passengers away. Marshal Brady, the telegram still clutched in his hand, looked like a man whose world had crumbled. He finally looked at Thad, his gaze devoid of its usual bluster. "She had a daughter," Brady said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Blackwood's gang had her. Said they'd send her back in pieces if Dorothy didn't play her part. I thought it was just about the money, Thod. I swear. Thod didn't respond. The excuses of a guilty man were just noise. He walked over to where Dorothy lay and gently closed her eyes. Her desperate act had bought him this moment, this terrible, impossible choice. He picked up Samuel, who was now quiet, his small body trembling. He walked back to Brady. The law was broken. Friendship was a lie. The only thing left was the chilling truth of the telegram. "They'll never stop," Thod said. It wasn't a question. Brady shook his head, looking old and defeated. "No, not them. They get what they pay for. They'll send men you won't see coming. Pinkertons, maybe worse. Men who look like bankers and kill like wolves." He looked at Samuel, then back at Thod, and a flicker of the old friend, the man Thod once knew, surfaced in his eyes. It was a look of profound pity. "There's no place you can run where they won't find him, as long as he has that mark." The star-shaped birthmark, Sarah's lucky star, a symbol of his unique identity, of his lineage, of their love. It was also a brand, a target, a curse that had turned his son into a commodity. The conflict was laid bare, brutal and absolute, identity versus safety. To save his son, he might have to destroy a part of him. He might have to destroy Samuel Mercer. Brady seemed to read his thoughts. "There's a doctor in town," he said quietly. "An old man. He asks no questions if the price is right. He can remove things, scars, tattoos." He couldn't bring himself to say the word birthmark. The implication hung in the air between them, ugly and heavy. Mutilate his son to save him. Burn away the last physical piece of his heritage, of his mother, of his name. It was a monstrous idea, a desecration. It was also, he realized with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, the only way. The only way to erase the target from his son's back. The only way to give him a life that wasn't spent running. "They'll be looking for Samuel Mercer," Brady continued, spelling out the grim logic. "Son of Thaddeus Mercer, the former sheriff. They have your name. They have his." Thod looked down at his son. The boy stared back, his blue eyes trusting, innocent of the terrible calculus being performed on his behalf. How could he do it? How could he hold his own son down and have a part of him burned away? It was a father's worst nightmare. But what was the alternative? A life of paranoia? A life waiting for the knock on the door, for the shadow in the alley? A life where Samuel could be snatched away at any moment forever? The violent rage of the shootout drained away, replaced by the cold, agonizing weight of an impossible choice. He would have to erase them both. He would have to kill Thaddeus and Samuel Mercer so that two new people could live. The doctor's office was a sterile, impersonal room above the town's general store. It smelled of carbolic acid and rubbing alcohol, a clean scent that couldn't wash away the dirty business at hand. The doctor was an old man with trembling hands and eyes that had seen too much to be shocked by anything. He took Brady's money without a word and prepared his tools. Thod sat in a chair, holding Samuel on his lap. The boy was tired and confused, but calm now, lulled by his father's steady presence. Thod's heart felt like a lead weight in his chest. He explained it to Samuel in the simplest terms he could manage, his voice thick with unshed tears. "There's a mark on your wrist, son. A bad man is looking for that mark. We have to make it go away, so he can never find you." Samuel looked at his wrist, at the little star that had always just been a part of him. He didn't understand, but he trusted his father. He nodded. "Will it hurt?" he asked, his small voice echoing in the quiet room. Thod's control shattered for a moment. He pulled the boy into a fierce hug, burying his face in his hair, breathing in his scent one last time as Samuel Mercer. "I'll be right here," he whispered. "I won't let you go." That was the only truth he had left to give. The procedure was quick. Thod held Samuel's arm steady, his own hand a vice grip of controlled agony. He didn't watch the doctor's tool, a small, heated instrument used for cauterizing wounds, but he couldn't block out the smell of seared flesh or the sharp, single cry of pain from his son. It was a sound that would be burned into his memory forever. When it was over, a small, circular burn marred the spot where the star had been. It was raw and angry, a wound that felt deeper than skin. The doctor applied a salve and a bandage, his movements practiced and detached. Samuel was crying softly now, the pain and the shock setting in. Thad held him close, murmuring promises of safety, of a new home, of a quiet life. He was no longer Thaddeus Mercer, grieving sheriff. That man had died in the dust outside redemption. He was now William Hartwell, a simple man looking for a fresh start. And the boy in his arms, his son, was no longer Samuel Mercer. He was Thomas Hartwell, a boy with a faint, circular scar on his wrist. Brady, true to his last-ditch effort at redemption, had arranged everything. He gave Thad all the money from his safe, a horse, and a map marking a parcel of land for sale in a quiet valley hundreds of miles north, a place where no one would know their names. He would file a report stating that Thaddeus Mercer and his son had been caught in a crossfire between his deputies and the Crimson Creek gang. Both tragically killed. Ezra Blackwood would be sent to a federal prison under a different name for a different crime, buried so deep the Boston organization would never find him. It was a clean slate, bought with blood, betrayal, and a terrible, loving sacrifice. Thad, now William, rode away from redemption without looking back. He rode for weeks, the boy, Thomas, riding in front of him, his bandaged wrist a constant painful reminder of the choice he had made. They spoke little. The silence was filled with the unspoken weight of what they had lost and what they had gained. They found the valley. It was peaceful, green, and isolated, nestled between two sleeping mountain ranges. They bought the small, neglected ranch with Brady's money. They worked. They fixed the fences, repaired the barn, planted a field of corn. They built a home, not with plans and nails, but with shared labor and quiet companionship. William taught Thomas how to ride, how to fish in the creek, how to mend a broken fence post. He taught him all the things a father teaches a son. He never spoke of Sarah, or of a man named Samuel, or of a life they once had. The past was a ghost, and he had learned the hard way that you don't invite ghosts into your home. He erased his own history to give his son a future. The peace they found was not a gift. It was earned. It was a fragile thing, built one splinter and scar at a time. It lived in the shared silence of an evening on the porch, in the easy rhythm of their chores, in the simple, profound fact of their continued existence together. Years passed. The corn grew tall in the summers. The snow fell deep in the winters. William's face grew more lined, his hair streaked with gray. Thomas grew from a boy into a young man, tall and strong, his eyes still the same shade of blue as the mother he would never know. The ranch prospered in its modest way. They had a few head of cattle, a small flock of chickens, a life that was quiet and predictable. The violent, desperate man named Thad Mercer was a distant memory, a story from another life. One late summer afternoon, William was watching his son from the porch. Thomas was chopping wood, the rhythmic thud of the axe a familiar, comforting sound. The sleeves of his shirt were rolled up, and as he raised the axe, the sunlight caught the inside of his left wrist. The scar was still there. It was no longer an angry red wound, but a faint, silvery circle, a pale moon on his skin. It was a permanent symbol of a choice made in a dusty town a lifetime ago, a symbol of a father's terrible, loving sacrifice. Thomas paused his work, wiping sweat from his brow. He caught his father watching him and smiled. It was a simple, easy smile, full of the uncomplicated peace of a boy who felt safe in the world, who knew nothing of Boston organizations or ruthless gangs or the brutal lengths of paternal love. He knew only the quiet strength of the man he called his father, the steady presence who had always been there. In that smile, William Hartwell found his solace. It was a bittersweet, hard-won peace, forever marked by the cost. The name on the headstone was gone. The star on the wrist was burned away, but the love remained, stronger than any name, more permanent than any mark. It was the foundation of the home they had built, one scar at a time,